Hello, and welcome to We the Students, a political discussion sponsored by Nauset Regional High School's AP US Government and Politics program, in collaboration with Nauset's video production class. Guns in America. It seems every time we turn on the television these days, we learn of another mass shooting happening somewhere in the country. We all know that gun ownership is guaranteed by the Second Amendment in the Constitution, but that was adopted nearly 230 years ago, in colonial times. Is the Second Amendment still relevant in 2020, or might it be time to repeal this guaranteed civil liberty? Over the next 30 minutes, we will discuss the issue of guns in America and whether the Second Amendment ought to be repealed. I'm your host, Jackson Montero, a senior here at Nauset and veteran of the AP Government program. Just for the record, opinions expressed here belong to the panelists and are not the views of Nauset Regional High School or the Nauset Regional School District. Now, let's meet our panel. Arguing that the Second Amendment should be repealed are three panelists: James Rose, Faye Lindberg, and Molly Keegans. Arguing against repeal of the Second Amendment are Kate Kennard, Luke McCarthy, and Charlotte LaBranche. To start it off, let's begin with this question. Why, if at all, is the Second Amendment important in our society? Faye, we'll start with your side.
So the repeal of the Second Amendment is important because it allows Congress to make safe and effective gun laws without the barrier that the Second Amendment creates.
But is more sweeping gun control really what we want? Because despite America having around 300,000 violent crimes using firearms each year, around 500,000 to 3 million lives every year are saved because of guns. So is more sweeping gun control really what we want?
We need to get rid of the Second Amendment so we can have more laws, so Congress can make laws that make sense for our country. Not just like, people are always going to have this Second Amendment right that covers you completely, but if we just get rid of that and replace it with another amendment, it will be better that way.
I agree with Faye. Like, the Second Amendment, it's a barrier to the gun control that we need in this country and that will save lives.
But why do we need it?
In the District of Columbia case v. Heller, the Supreme Court said that there was a historical tradition of prohibiting the carrying of dangerous and unusual weapons, and that would still be in place after the decision that allows individuals to possess firearms. So there is gun control in the United States.
But it's not effective gun control. And that's because the Second Amendment is in place. So we need to replace the Second Amendment with a different amendment that will still make it so you can have guns.
From 1883 to 2013, there were 62 mass shootings, and since the Columbine shootings in 1999 to 2013, there's been 130 school shootings, so maybe it's possible that stricter gun control laws could have saved some of those lives.
But what about in the Parkland shooting, there were two men that one was a Navy veteran and the other was a trained security guard, and they weren't allowed to have guns because of the Gun-Free School Zone Act, and they could have, when they went in to stop the shooter, they couldn't kill him because they didn't have guns.
It's possible that with the new amendment and the new rules that there'd be less people with guns, but we shouldn't have to live in a world where there's a possibility that someone could shoot you at every corner.
I mean, it doesn't matter what world you live in. People will always be able to create their own and carry guns. So all you're doing with repealing the Second Amendment is allowing the bad person to have the gun, while not allowing someone that could stop them to have a gun.
For example, in Cleveland on March 3rd last year, there were two armed men that walked into a deli, and one forced his way behind the counter and demanded the owner to open the register, but the owner pulled out his firearm and shot at the men, which sent them away. And this was a public setting where there was not enough time to call law enforcement, so the owner needed his firearm to make them go away.
Repealing the Second Amendment and replacing it wouldn't make it so you can't have guns for self-defense. You would still be able to have guns. There would just be better regulation laws about it, and people couldn't use the Second Amendment as a blanket statement for why you can have a gun.
How would that help, though? Like, what could you replace it with that would still allow people to have guns while also not allowing people to have guns?
You could say in the new amendment, you could just include that there has to be stricter enforcement of gun restriction laws. So the amendment includes gun regulation so that people can't shoot down every gun regulation law saying that violates the Second Amendment.
Isn't it the law enforcement's job, though, to enforce the laws? Like the police officers, shouldn't they be like controlling the gun laws? How would that have to do with the Second Amendment? How would that be the Second Amendment's fault?
Well, like you said before, law enforcement can't always be there in the right amount of time. They can try their hardest, but they can't always be there.
And that's why people need to use their guns to defend themselves.
And they still can if we change the Second Amendment and put a different one in place.
But if we added a new amendment that had gun control built in, amendments are inherently inflexible and require Supreme Court cases to change their interpretation. If we let Congress do it right now, under the leeway that the Second Amendment grants, it'd be much more flexible and responsive to today's climate.
But the Second Amendment doesn't allow any leeway, doesn't allow enough leeway.
That's just not true. We have gun regulation. You can't buy an automatic gun.
We just don't have enough, and that's why we need to repeal the Second Amendment
If
and
you
replace
can't-
it with gun control.
If you can't buy an automatic gun, then why do people have automatic guns?
Most people don't have automatic guns.
Some people do.
Most people don't.
Well, some people still do.
In America, the United States makes up only it's less than 5% of the population, but we still own 40% of the guns in the whole world. So there's definitely lots of guns. There's the most guns in America.
But what about the people that own the guns and use them properly? It's not fair if we repeal the Second Amendment because a small amount of individuals abuse their right. So how would that be fair to the majority that obey the laws and possess guns properly?
The people that are possessing guns properly shouldn't be concerned about this because as long as they're doing all the right things, they could still have their guns.
But if you got rid of the Second Amendment, they wouldn't be allowed to.
If we got rid of the Second Amendment and replaced it with a better amendment, they would still be able to.
All right, let's move on to the next question. Do you believe that the Second Amendment makes people safer in our society today?
Yes, as I brought up with the statistic earlier, 500,000 to 3 million people's lives are saved a year due to guns, while only costing around 300,000 lives a year. So that inherently means it's more safe. It's a net positive.
And most lawful gun owners hope that the day will never come when they have to defend themselves, but they always have to be prepared just in case it does happen.
In the latest reporting year, gun homicides claimed 14,542 American lives compared to 27 lives in Australia. And Australia has better, stricter gun laws than we do here. So clearly it's not working the way that we're doing it right now. We need to think of something different.
You also have to remember in countries like that, though, freedom is much lower. As the report that I have in here that I forgot the name of says, America actually has a much higher freedom ranking against countries like Japan, where America lands 15th freedom, and countries like Japan or Australia are down near 25, so the government does have more control over their lives.
Since 2013, gun deaths have gone from 80 to 100 a day. So do you value freedom over life? I mean, those people who got shot and are dead now have absolutely no freedom.
But again, you have to remember that a lot of lives are being saved, so it is still a net positive.
A lot of lives are being saved, but a lot of lives are being lost.
That is true, but more lives are being saved. So how do you even argue against that?
If there were less guns on the street, there's a good chance that if less people have guns, there's less chance for accidental deaths also, which occur. And there's issues with children that get into their parents' guns and accidentally shoot themselves or others. So if there's stricter gun laws, maybe it just means that the guns have to be locked up more and the bullets have to be kept farther apart and all these things that'll just make guns a little less dangerous.
How would you even test for that, though? Would you have the police come and raid your house to make sure you have your gun in the right spot?
In Germany, that is what they do. Police have the authority to go in to someone's home, a gun owner's home, and check that they are taking all the necessary precautions, that they have the gun in a locked case, and that they are the only one with a key to it.
Isn't that a serious breach on civil rights, though?
No.
The police can't just knock down your door without a warrant.
Yeah, but because they have a gun, they can.
Doesn't that give the police a lot of power, though?
All they're doing in the house is checking if you are following the regulation, and if you are, you have nothing to worry about.
That leaves a huge amount of leave room for abuse, though, because if a police officer doesn't like you, he can come and knock down your door every third day.
Well, it's worked fine in Germany. Why can't we do it here?
Well, we can't do it here because America is the land of the free. We have regulations like this for a reason.
Sometimes those regulations have to change to adapt to a new society.
But why?
Because our society is not the same that it was 200 years ago.
That's,
We've changed.
that's true, but like, why?
But why have we changed?
No, why would you want to change it if it's working?
We didn't necessarily want to change it. It has changed, and clearly it's not working because a lot of people are dying from gun violence.
You also have to remember a lot of people are being saved. Again,
They
net
wouldn't
positive.
have to be saved if it didn't exist at all in the first place, if there wasn't as much gun violence as there is now.
I agree with that.
You hear about a lot of the illegal use on national headlines, but defensive gun use rarely makes it on local or national headlines. So,
Maybe because there's more gun violence than there is gun
Because
saving.
that's not the problem.
but
Gun
according
violence
to
is the
Luke,
problem.
there's more people being saved by guns than being killed.
Can you show me that statistic, Luke?
Yes, it's in the CDC research paper, which is right here. I think it's on page 15. Right here. Defensive use of guns by crime victims is a common occurrence, although exact numbers remain disputed. Almost all national surveys estimate or indicate that defensive use of guns by victims are at least as common as offensive uses by criminals, with estimates of annual uses ranging from 500,000 to 3 million, in context of about 300,000 violent crimes involving firearms in 2008.
I'm glad that there's a lot of lives being saved from gun use, and I only wish that there wasn't such a need to have to shoot people down. I think that maybe if there were stricter gun laws, that there would be less violence and less worry about having, like, if you're not worried about someone breaking into your home, you wouldn't keep a gun necessarily, or you wouldn't be so concerned about the government taking your guns.
Excuse me. Do you believe that the right to live how does that contrast with the right to bear arms?
I think that people's right to live is a right that definitely has to be respected, but also with this having a net positive on lives, that is enforcing the right to live more than the right to bear arms.
And there are people that live in certain areas of the country that fear for their lives, and they want to be able to bear arms so they can protect themselves from people around them.
And they would, because the Second Amendment wouldn't just be taken away and leaving the country with no guns. It would be taken away and replaced with laws that allow for safer guns.
We can also talk about how it's really hard to amend the Constitution, because for that to happen, it needs to be proposed by 2/3 vote in the House and the Senate, and then it must be ratified by 3/4 of state legislators, so that could take a long time. And if it's not necessary, because there's already gun regulation in the country that seems to be working well, with more lives saved than ended.
Oh, no.
Go ahead, James.
Oh, well, I think that it doesn't matter how long that repealing the Second Amendment would take. It is a necessary step that our country needs to take for the betterment of all of its people.
There are things being done, though, like President Obama. When he was president, he issued 23 executive orders to improve knowledge on firearm violence so people can learn more about it and help stop it.
Yes, but we've seen that that's just not enough. There were 417 mass shootings in 1 year in 2019. We need gun control to stem this epidemic of gun violence in our country.
Also, alongside what Charlotte was saying, there are more legislation things coming down the pipeline, like the bump stock ban that's in the process of being passed right now.
But nothing's going to be enough unless we take away the Second Amendment and replace it with something else, because people are always going to have that blanket right that you individually have the right to own a gun.
Won't people still abuse the new amendment, because the people that are abusing the amendment now are still going to do that with the new amendment in place? So what is that going to do for the better?
Well, probably they will, because people abuse things, but at least we know who is abusing it and we can target those people. Right now, everyone still has the right.
And
so
okay, like you said, just because a few people aren't following the rules with the guns, you say that just because there's a couple people not following the rules, you shouldn't get rid of the amendment and get rid of the guns. Well, in the same way, just because if some people may not follow the new amendment, maybe that is not a reason to not try at all.
I don't think that making a new amendment would make people that are abusing the current amendment, I don't think that would change their ways.
Because most people who who have gun violence and commit crimes are using guns illegally or without a permit. So why would repealing the amendment, how would that stop people from using them illegally if they're already using them illegally?
We would be able to know better who is abusing it and who's not getting their guns legally. So we would be able to target them out and take away their guns.
But again, isn't that the law enforcement's job, not the amendment's job? How would the new amendment prevent that?
The law enforcement can't do anything right now because of the Second Amendment. They wouldn't be able to take away their guns because of the Second Amendment. But as long as we replace the Second Amendment with something else, they would be able to.
If they acquired them illegally, they can totally. If you have a gun without a permit, the law enforcement can take it away.
But can law enforcement stop someone if they think that they're walking around with a gun? How would law enforcement know if they saw someone walking with a gun, if it's legal or not?
I'm sure if a person has a gun, you can ask them, how
People
if
lie.
you possess that. Well, then that's their fault for not telling that they're lying. They can question a person, ask them for their license, and if they don't have that, then they have the right to take it away from them.
I think we should look to what other countries have done in the case of gun control. So in the UK, they've banned all handguns, and some arguments have been risen that even if we did ban it, there are so many guns in the US that it wouldn't affect anything because gun violence would still be an issue. But in 2003, crimes that included a firearm fell consistently to 4,700. So that shows. That was in 2013. So that shows that a ban on handguns did affect crimes or violent crime.
For example, maybe a new law that could be put in place if the Second Amendment is repealed is a limit on how many guns you can own. So you could only own 2 or something, so that there's less circulation of guns in the United States, which means less chance for guns to get into the wrong hands.
I mean, you still could just buy it through your cousin, though, with that regulation in place. If, let's say, you had a cousin that doesn't like guns, you could say, hey, can you buy 2 guns and sell them to me? And it would be pretty easy to acquire more than 2 guns, no problem.
So when it comes to repealing the Second Amendment, do you believe that repealing the Second Amendment would pave the way for being able to create more gun legislation, or do you believe that it is currently the job of Congress, no matter what the Constitution, to create the gun legislation that people feel is needed?
Right now, Congress isn't able to create the legislation that is needed because of the interpretation of the Second Amendment. So that is why we need to repeal the Second Amendment and replace it with gun legislation that makes sense for the 20th century, for our 20th century way of life.
But the court specifically stated that the Second Amendment did not limit prohibitions on the possession of firearms by felons and the mentally ill, penalties for carrying firearms in school and government buildings, or laws regulating the sales of guns. So right now, the Supreme Court, which interprets the Constitution, they said that Congress can make laws that deny people the right to get guns depending on their situation.
But you go.
A lot of people have been led to believe that the Second Amendment protects their guns absolutely, and no matter what the Constitution or the Supreme Court says, those people are going to stick to that. So sometimes it just takes repealing the whole thing and starting fresh to show people very plainly what can be done with the new amendment.
I think that's just a problem with them, though, because Congress is informed, so Congress would know about that, so they can pass the laws. Why does it matter if the people are misinformed?
Because the people are voting for their Congress people, and if the Congress people that are getting voted in are Congress people that are preaching to get the vote from the, for example, a lot of rural people believe in keeping their guns. There's a lot of popularity of guns with rural people. So if they are voting, if their Congress people are telling them, we are going to protect your guns so that they get the vote, then they're going to go to Congress and protect the guns.
So you're going to solve a PR issue by appealing the Constitution. That's so superfluous.
it's the only way that's going to work. Nothing else is working for us because the Second Amendment protects you to own your own gun. We need to change the Second Amendment to make regulation better in the country.
But Congress can already make regulation.
It can't, though, because
She
the
just said
Second
it
Amendment, it can't make effective regulation.
Okay, what would you consider effective regulation? No one's owning guns?
No, people can still own guns, but you own guns for hunting and you own guns safely for self-defense, or people in the military can own guns, or people
That is the
training.
amendment that is in place right now, though.
You're just saying, again, solving a PR issue with an amendment.
For example, maybe they could restrict guns to less of the automatic guns that are often seen in school shootings and massacres, and maybe they only have like handguns and like hunting rifles and things that are less dangerous for the public.
Again, we don't have automatic guns. Those are extremely uncommon.
Semi-automatic guns then, because those are the guns that are used in mass shootings. I think she just misspoke, and that was the point that she's trying to make.
But
A ban on semi-automatic guns.
Handguns are semi-automatic guns. You know that, right?
Yeah, okay. Semi-automatic rifles. Is that good enough?
Right. Excuse me. And let's think about back when the Constitution was written and the Founding Fathers got the Second Amendment into the Constitution. That was in colonial times when the most advanced weapons they had were muskets. And now we have weapons that have way more firepower and can do more damage than they could even imagine at the time. So how do you argue that that's what their thought process was? How do you apply that to a modern day situation?
I really don't believe that the original interpretation of the Constitution, or the original intention of the Constitution, matters at all today. Because the Supreme Court has the power to interpret laws. That's their whole thing. And they've interpreted it much differently than it was originally. Therefore, the amendment is not the same in the slightest, and the original intention doesn't matter.
Well, if the Supreme Court's job is to interpret the Constitution, are they misinterpreting it if they're interpreting it differently from what the Founding Fathers wanted?
It's their job. They can do what they want. They're an independent judiciary. They're not restricted by anything else.
Well, their interpretation of the Second Amendment has led to, again, 417 mass shootings in 1 year. So I think it's fair to say that there's a problem with guns in our country.
Well, I mean, mass shootings aren't even the biggest factor of deaths by guns. The biggest factor is suicides, definitely. But again, as I keep pulling up my statistic, more people are saved every year than killed.
And unauthorized gun possession is associated with higher rates of firearm violence than legal possession. So how would repealing the Second Amendment take those illegal people away from using their guns?
There's always going to be people who are hiding from the law and breaking the law, and
Exactly. So how would the Second Amendment change that?
maybe
Repealing it change
maybe it wouldn't change it at all, but it would at least help with the guns that the law knows about. It can regulate the flow of guns and when they're being sold and to who they're being sold to and where they're kept. All these things that even if you can't get rid of the illegal guns, at least you can do something about the legal guns.
So you're going to stop the people that are stopping the bad guys.
People using legal guns are using them correctly and how they're supposed to be used. So why should we take their right away from them because the illegal people are using them not correctly?
People using legal guns aren't necessarily using them correctly, though. You could get a gun legally and then still do bad things, kill people with it and things like that. So we would be regulating the guns better to stop more violence in general.
Most people that do bad things with guns, though, get them illegally. So
And other things like drugs that are illegal, people still get them illegally. And so how would making guns illegal stop those illegal people?
At least it would make it very clear that the guns are not tolerated. So if someone has a gun, or if, for example, if there is suspicion that someone has drugs, the police can get a warrant and search their house for drugs. So if there's suspicion that someone has a gun, the police can get a warrant and get their guns.
Exactly.
they're
So why would
illegal guns.
Illegally, you mean, right? A gun
Yeah,
illegally?
yeah.
Why would you need to repeal it? Because police officers are already doing that today.
Yeah, if you have a stash of automatic guns and the police have probable cause to think you do, they can just go into your house and remove them. So how would
So-
that change?
Why do you need to repeal it for them to still do the same thing?
Well, it would just make it that you could make laws much easier and maybe stricter so that there's less. So more guns are illegal, so there's less guns on the street.
Kate, do you have any response to that?
No.
Okay, next question. When the Second Amendment was put into the Constitution, it was intended to protect the rights of individual people who wanted to own their firearm. And how would you contrast that with the right of everybody in America to live, to get the American dream of prosperity and pursuit of happiness? And how do you think that the Second Amendment and the blanket right to own guns affects that right, and how do they contrast with each other?
I think it's a security for safety. So how can you live a happy life if you don't think you're safe?
But again, people feel threatened by guns in our country every day.
It doesn't matter if people feel threatened, because if you ban every single gun, you say no guns allowed,
That's not what
then
we're doing.
I know, but if I'm saying in the hypothetical world, the criminals would still have guns, and since people cannot protect themselves against those criminals, that would make even more fear.
For example, last March in Philadelphia, a man was closing his store when a masked man pointed a gun at him, and the store owner complied with his demands and got him money from the register, but the robber shot at him anyway. But he missed the store owner, and the store owner got his gun from his hip holster and shot at the robber. So even though he was complying with his demands, he still wanted to shoot him. And the police weren't there in time, so he needed his gun to defend himself.
Would your arguing for the repealing of Second Amendment stop people like that owner from protecting themselves?
Not necessarily.
Maybe it would stop the criminal, though, who has the gun. Yeah.
How? If he's getting it illegally, an amendment to stop that wouldn't do anything.
Do you know if he's getting it illegally?
Generally, people that are committing crimes with guns are, yes.
How do you know that?
Kate, do you have resources for that, please?
Then I don't believe it.
Even if it doesn't stop everyone, the regulation could stop. Even if it stopped one person, isn't that enough? Isn't that good?
It'll make it less mainstream to be just like carrying your gun around on the street. And police and law enforcement will know better who has guns illegally, who has guns safely and legally. It'll just make gun violence go down if we repeal the Second Amendment and add a new amendment.
So you're saying if people aren't carrying guns, people that are carrying guns, the police could see them and then know they're criminals?
No, but they could investigate them better.
How would they be able to do that?
What?
How would they know that someone's carrying a gun illegally just because of a new amendment?
Yeah, they have X-ray vision.
The amendment could lead to new laws that could allow them to stop. It's just about the possibility for new laws, the room for growth that the new amendment would allow.
But according to a Harvard School of Public Health survey, 80% of the respondents who carried their handgun carried a concealed in a permit. So why should we repeal the amendment to take away that 80% of people when only a small percent are holding them illegally?
We're not necessarily repealing the amendment to stop the people carrying guns safely, stopping from doing that.
But wouldn't that take away the right for all people? If you repealed the Second Amendment, wouldn't it take away the right from all people to hold a gun?
No.
No, it would not.
You give the power of Congress to decide that, though. They could say, yeah, no guns, you can't have them.
It would give Congress the power to say less guns or guns this way. The new amendment, for example, someone said the right to bear and keep and bear arms with Congress's regulation.
Congress has that power right now, though, with the current amendment. They can make regulations.
Excuse me, Kate. Unfortunately, we're just about out of time, so we'll have to hold our discussion there. We thank Nauset High School's television production class and Lower Cape TV for making this valuable experience possible for all of us. That concludes another segment of We the Students, a political discussion sponsored by the Nauset Regional High School AP US Government and Politics program. I'm Jackson Montero. Thanks for watching.